So it's time to take a look at doing the graph now for the audio. We have a few options. So we found some thanks to our Discord. And we have this one, Scotplot, which supports Avalonia. And there's a lot of options in there. We're only really interested in the line one for now. Looks a little bit not quite right. Like the audio one there looks good, but we're not doing that kind of visual. But the lines, I don't see any sort of fill in. So we may be able to do that or add that, but I don't see it straight away. We've got this micro charts, Avalonia micro charts, which looks like there. That's a nice visual there. So I think we'll close the Scotplot one for now. We then have this Oxyplot as well, which supports Avalonia too. Doesn't really show you anything here. Let's try and click into the main one. Can't really see any examples. Docs. So again, not really seeing anywhere to see how this should look, or examples, or anything really. Let's try documentation. It's a PDF, so it's, yeah, that looks okay. So big documentation, but looks entirely like a line plot so far. Heat map, pie chart. Yeah, so there's quite a few in. Still not seeing anything with a fill. And then we have live charts, which so far looks the nicest. If we click get started, you can see it's got a really nice website. Click Avalonia. We've got installation, controls, overviews, visuals. You can see they've got fill here. Got animations. So this by far looks like the most feature-packed one, which sometimes is good, sometimes is bad. Sometimes it's like over-cluttered. It's got zooming and panning, X and Y axis. So I think for a first one, we'd either try micro charts or live charts. So I'm just going to go with live charts to start with, and let's just have a play with this. So if we go back, click installation, and we basically need to install this NuGet package. So I've gone ahead and already cleaned up our project. Because this is only going to be a desktop app, I've just deleted the iOS, Android, and web parts of this. If we want to add them in future, we'll re-add them, but there's no point keeping old code that we're not going to use in the project. I've updated this project now to Preview 8 and .NET 7, and doing so also breaks the Android and iOS projects because the code has changed a lot on Avalonia since then. So don't bother keeping just redundant code in your project. If we want to add back support for Android or iOS, we can always do that in future by simply adding a new project in, and it will base it off the latest template. So with this cleaned up now, we should be ready to just add, I guess, a NuGet package to the project. So manage NuGet packages. There it is, live chart skier. Install it into what I presume will just be the main project. I don't think it needs to go specifically into desktop project. And then create a view model. So they've just made a view model, which we already have. So I'm guessing they just made this. Let's just copy this property here into our view model. View models, main view model. And we'll just chuck it inside of our view models. Control dot and import the missing references. There we go. Now we have a property called series on main view model. Now we've got to add the chart to our UI. So we want to add a view model, which we already have because we've already got a view set up correctly. So we just check out our view. We already have the view model set up for us. So we just need to now reference this namespace. So we'll add that below here. And now we can use al VC. And let's just paste the chart in. So we'll want the chart to live in the main area, which is here. So let's get rid of that expander that's lived in there for a while now. And let's just dump the live chart in there. And let's see if this builds and runs. Yeah, that's built so far. So let's see if it now runs and shows us something. Oh, and there you go. There's the chart already in there. So that looks nice. It even resizes with animation. That's nice. Yeah, that's really good. So that's a chart in. Now we need to actually gain it looking something like what we expect it to look like. So if we just pull up the Boolean loudness meter, you can see we're a long way off yet it looking like the chart. We need it to scroll automatically. We need some axes on here. You can see that I didn't even notice before. You can actually zoom. Can't zoom in, it's already zoomed in, but you can zoom out. So you want to zoom in and out. We'll do the kind of bottom bar and side bar as a separate thing altogether. That's not really linked to what we want to do for now. It's just this main graph here. So you basically got a bar graph by the looks of it, and a fill underneath. We'll have to do some fancy colouring halfway up somehow as well, potentially. But what we'll find here possibly is a compromise between it looking identical and using an existing library. So if we go through the hassle of making the whole library ourselves, we can perfect it to look absolutely identical, but it's a lot more work. Whereas if we find a library that's usable and gets us 90% of the way there, we might choose to have it our own style very close to what we're after, in the compromise of the amount of work involved. So let's see how close we can get this to the actual Avalonia loudness meter. So let's start with the first thing. Let's try to get the scale from 0 to -69 roughly. So for that, let's go to the view model, and I presume it's going to be these values. It looks like they're the values going left to right. So let's just do 0, -10, -40, -55, -69, something like that. Oh, I think it was -60 actually. And if we run that now, let's see if we have a scale that looks right. And there we go, we have a scale from 0 to -60. Now you'll see our scale is kind of not necessarily logarithmic in a sense, but it's got these specific points on that ours don't. So we want to try and alter the axis here, if we can control that. And also along here will become time, I believe, like this, and scrolling. So let's just start with the axis and the fill. The fill should be nice and easy. So configuring mappers, we've basically just got to read through this documentation to figure out what to do. Mapping looks like it maps a specific object to a point as a primary and a secondary value. So that'll be good if we want to have specific values, I guess, showing up maybe. Maybe that's something to do with tooltips. Either way, we're not too fussed about that right now. Overview. How it works. Data changes. So it looks like it works based on view models, which is good, which means anything with view model stuff should automatically update. Automatic updates. Yeah, mentions it basically follows iNotify property changed and collection changed info. So when you add things, it changes. That's good to know. More info on mappers. Global mappers. Local mappers. Cool. Well, we're not interested in that right now, so we'll skim over that. Paint. Here we go. That's what we want to do. We want to fill the points. We also don't need geometry. So I wonder if we set geometry size to 0, we'll just remove them. And we can do fill. Let's try fill equals new solid color paint. Import the missing references, and then let's change this now to a similar value here, which is 63, 77, 99. And did I do that wrong? New SK color. New solid color paint, new SK color. That should give us the color. We also do want a stroke, which at the minute we'll just do the light color, which is 120, 152, and 203, and that wants to be the stroke, if I've done that right. Yep, so that should give us the stroke. So let's just see if that now has the right colour and fill. And there we go, it needs to be a bit thicker, but we still have geometry, so there's still dots, and we don't want any dots, and it's super thin. And the fill is the wrong way. So we need to see if we can flip the fill, or is geometry size the one that controls the dots as well, and the geometry is classed as part of that outline. Let's have a look at that first. Nope, so it is stroke. We've got to control the stroke thickness somehow. Geometry size doesn't make it invisible either, so we'll leave that for the minute. And if we look in line series properties and stroke properties, you can see this solid color paint is actually a class, and it has stroke thickness inside, so we can use a constructor initialization and do stroke thickness. Let's try 10. Let's leave the geometry size to 0 as well, and the geometry stroke to null maybe, to try and get rid of those. There we go. So now we've got a thick, that's obviously too thick now, but we control the line thickness. So probably want it to be 2 or 3. And there we go. We're getting somewhere like maybe 2. But that's pretty much the same. I'm going to leave it at 3. I kind of like the slightly thicker line. Now let's see if we can fix the fill going the other way and the axes. So let's take a look at the fill property, see what we can control. So fill is just solid color, geometry fill and stroke fill. The geometry fill is these dots. Geometry size. So it doesn't appear from at first glance we have any control of where the fill is going. So area here shows it fills above and below 0. So maybe this kind of 0 point is oh, there's also a shorthand for thickness there, I'm guessing. Makes it a bit shorter, but I kind of like that explicit declaration. So it appears you can make your own geometry, which means we can probably make our own fill. But if we can't control that, I've got a nice easy way of, in my head, that might work, that involves no extra coding. Let me just glance down here to make sure there's nothing we're missing. You'd have thought they'd have mentioned it here as well, if there's any settings. So my thought is, what if we just simply change the data going into the graph and invert it? So if 0's up here, it wants to be filled from bottom up. So you want 0 to be down here and 60 to be up here, and we simply invert the data. This legend we don't care about because the original doesn't have that. It has this pop-up, which again is probably something that we'll either omit or have a completely custom bit of code for that knows where the mouse is, or we'll develop an add-in for the chart potentially. So ignoring that, either way, we don't want this kind of this hover. We'd want this kind of hover. It also appears, I don't think we can actually control the axis either. Of all the advanced things it has, it doesn't seem to have a way to control these axes. If we look at the gallery of all the controls, you'll notice every single control has an evenly spaced axis. If we take a look at the API and come to axis, it does look like there's actually a lot of information in here and a lot of values that we could possibly use. So there is already, I've just noticed somewhere in here, is inverted. So it indicates whether the axis is inverted. So let's just try that. And it looks like, to specify that, it's on the actual chart. So let's start with the y-axis. So the y-axis we'll have to bind, and we'll bind it to y-axis. We'll then just go and make a y-axis in here. So public, I don't even know what it is, to be honest. I should probably have checked that out. It is an enumerable of I-Cartesian axis. So that's probably just a list of axes. And that will be y-axis getter and setter equals a new list, and a new axis maybe. And now finally in an axis, can we do the is inverted equals true. So let's see if that has done anything, and then possibly if the inverting sorts the fill out, we might have a way of doing this now. There we go. So now the inverted has worked, but the values are still wrong because we don't want to fill up here. We want to be empty. So all it's done is really flipped the chart around. So 0's at the bottom. So we still need to change the value. It's always filling to 0. So although flipping the axis has worked, we don't want that because we need the fill to be inverted. So let's see if we can find fill anywhere. No, so I can't find anywhere that controls the fill. So I think what we're going to have to do is change the data then, so that the data we pass in will simply invert completely. So when it's 60, the max, it will actually be 0, and when it's 0, it's 60. So all we'll do is when we pump this information in from the audio, we'll actually tweak these values to be in the right range so that it fills up to 60 in a sense. So in order to visualize that, there should be flat here, so nothing here, which would be the 60. This should be fully filled. This should be mid-filled. This should be totally flat again, and then we can go up to fill. So you can see if we did it this way, 60 would be 0, so maximum volume, and it would actually say 0 here if we change the axis, and this would be negative 60 decibels. So we can now get the chart to fill like we want, but we need to tweak the axis labels and ideally the position. So if we go back to the axes, there seems to be a lot of options in the axis. So we have axis orientation, which I wonder if that's the opposite of inverting and whether it'll change the fill. Nope, that's just whether it's an X or Y axis. You've got min step, and min steps define the interval between every separator. So I presume if we do min step, then this could possibly equal a lot more bars. No, so even though min step's 1, we still have a divider of 10, so that's not it, even though that's pretty much what it says. Gets a minimum step. A step defines the interval between every separator in an axis. It'll calculate it automatically based on the data. If the step is less than min step, then min step will be used as the axis. Force step to min. If true, the library will not calculate the step automatically, it will instead use the min step. So we've got to do force step is true. And now we should see one line every step, which obviously is too many, but let's see if we can get some kind of control going here for the axis. There we go. Now you can see all the lines. So now can we hide some of those lines? We also probably want to use this min limit and max limit so that we can specify values outside of the range and it not affect the graph. So min limit would be, we're going to be bearing in mind we're doing this in positives. So we're going to manipulate the data. So min would be 0 and max would be 60, which is effectively the 0 point. And now let's also try and do, I don't know, 120, 60, 20, 120. And in the middle, let's just put, let's change this to 120. Let's see if it literally ignores the value or caps it and forces it to become 60, because we really want it to be capped and not just, you know, literally removed from it. Yeah, so the value goes off the screen, but the bar chart itself, or the line graph rather, stays where it wants. So that's what we want. So now this graph will always be limited to where we'd expect it to be. So let's just put them back for now. We'll keep that limit in there. Visible data bounds gets the data visible bounds, the min and max visible values in the axis that are currently in the UI. I think that's maybe something to do with zooming. Data bounds gets the data bound now. Name labeler gets a function that receives a number and returns the label. So that's what we want, a labeler. So a labeler equals new function. So if it's a double returning a string, we should just be able to do val and return 0 for now. Or it's got to return a string. And is that going to work? Is it going to complain? Yeah, so we don't need the brackets anyway. And instead of just doing nothing, why don't we actually make the function work? Which would be, we want to basically invert it. So the first thing we want to do is possibly limit the value between 0 and 60. I'm thinking, or we can do that after. It doesn't really matter which way around we do it, but let's just limit the value. So we'll do the math dot min. And bear in mind, we are going to pass in, I believe, negative values already. Did we just put negatives on, or were they already negatives? So we output the data, so it is negative 60s. So we are already sending in literally 0 to negative 60, or potentially further than that. So we want the maximum to be minus 60, so it can't go past, and the minimum to be 0, so it can't go above. And that will be the val passed in. So that limits our value to within 0 and minus 60. We then want minus 60 to become 0 and 0 to become 60. So for that to work, we just need some basic math, which is adding 60 to the value. So then minus 60 is now 0 and 0 is now 60. And then we just convert that to a string. But bear in mind, this is actually the label rather. So yeah, that's right. So now the label will be that. So if we just do all that dot to string, that should, I believe, give us a label now that converts the numbers, even though we've got hundreds of them. Actually, we're going to have to change the step so we can see it. The label should now be the other way around. Or in this case, not, they're all 60. So we've done something wrong there. So let's just do the val to string first and the step to 10. Let's just see if the labeler is even working. I've probably just done something wrong in the math there. So 0 to 60. So what did I do wrong in the math? Because I clearly did something wrong. Oh, I know why. Because we are currently passing in the right data. Yeah. So we're going to be passing in 0 to 60 already. We've already got to manipulate the data to get it to fill correctly. So 0 should be minus 60. We've already manipulated it. So the outcome of 0 should say minus 60. So we're going to be receiving 0 to 60, not 0 to minus 60. So you want to invert this already. The min 60 and the max is 0. So that limits it to 0 to 60, which it already is here. And at the top, 60 should be 0, and 0 should be minus 60. So now it becomes minus 60. So I forgot we'd already manipulated the data. We have to manipulate the data going into the chart first, and then further manipulate it for labels. And there we go. We now have the correct graph showing the axis correctly. Now we just need to try and get it within this range of negatives. So to do that, put the step back to 1. And let's see if we can do something about only making... Ah, there you go. I know what we can do. Oh, no, you can't. The labels. I was going to say you could hide the labels for certain... Actually, there's a point. Could you... I'm wondering whether you return null or blank. I think if you return blank, it's just going to return... Let's just test this. Val equals, and then what's a value we have? 40. 40. Otherwise, can you return null and hide the actual value? No, just crashes. So you can't do that. So can you return a blank string? Which I'm guessing would still show the axis and just show a blank string. That would make sense. So you can't limit it by the labeler simply not returning. Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, you can and you can't, but you know, you don't want that behavior. So what else can we do? Min, limit, max, limit, unit width, position, labels. Show separator lines, yes. Separator at center, text at center. So this labels as possibly something. Gets us sets of labels. If the labels are not null, then the axis labels will be pulled from the labels collection. The label is mapped to the chart based on the position of the label and the position of the point, both integers. If the axis requires a label outside the bounds of the label collection, then the index will be returned as the label, so effectively 0. So I don't think you can label them that way as opposed to labeler, but it sounds like it's just gonna, it's another way of doing it by index base. So you could put like, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then within that value it would simply pull in a label. So that doesn't help either. So I don't think there's a way at the minute in this to do the axis, which means for now we can just hide the axis, so I presume is visible. We'll just hide the axis, and all we can do for that now is make our own axis that sits over the top anyway. We'll just put a grid over the top of the chart and have lines, and we can make the axis ourselves. It's not the end of the world. So that just hides that, and the one at the bottom hopefully we can still use. And we'll just put a little bit of padding on, probably a margin of 10 on that now, just to bring it down. So that would be here. Where's it gone? There we go. Margin 0, 10, 0, 0. Left, top, right, bottom, that's right. And just check that's nudged down a little bit. So we know we've got a to-do to overlay an axis on the grid, and that is on the limit of the curve, which is fine. We can bring that down, and it probably wants about 15. So let's just try and put that line axis, the y-axis, over the top now. So we're going to use the same grid as we did for the meter here. And all we'll do is we're already in a border that wants to change to a grid, so we can have multiple things overlaying on top. And then we'll put another element inside this, which will be on top. And this should scale just the same. And then inside here, we'll do a rectangle. I think actually we need an axis as well. So we might as well copy the other part as well, which was a label. Yeah, so actually we'll do a label inside, which means we'll want a stack panel with the orientation, or we'll want a stack panel, no, we'll want another grid. Thinking about it, because we'll want to fill going across. Yeah, so we want another grid with, let's get this right. This grid's inside, it's got rows going down. Each element inside of here will be on a specific row. So this first one will be on row 0. Inside this we'll have a label and a value, content 0. And this will have grid.columns, which will be auto and then fill. So the label will size automatically, and then the bar will go through. In fact, you also want a bar with a line and the label underneath, which actually is after, which is fine. So you'd want like 0 and then a hyphen, which I think there's a long hyphen, which is also what we pasted here. Yep, so 0 long hyphen and then rectangle with a fill of white and opacity of probably 0.5, height of maybe 2, and I think that is it. That should fill. And the grid.column is 1. So that should do one line, and then the next one would be the -3, which we show -3, yep. So let's do -3, and let's just try that firstly. Let's just see if 2 work, and then we can just dump in the rest, and we should have a grid axis on the Y that we can control and align, obviously, correctly with margins and things we need. So we can see it's there, it hasn't filled across, and it's also black text at the minute and needs padding. So we'll put some margin top and bottom on there. We will want to do a style, but being lazy for now, we can just do foreground white. And rectangle, maybe horizontal alignment is stretch. Let's see if that works. Not quite. So that will be because we have column definitions here still, which we don't need. We just need a single column. That now should fill the entire. In fact, you can just delete column definitions altogether on this one. So now it doesn't fill at all. Let's just do a quick check that our grid is already filling. If the grid isn't filling, then that is the problem we have. So the grid fills. You can see the bar goes across and fills. So why is it not filling? Does it get hidden by the chart maybe? We've got to do a Z index. Oh no, it's showing now magically. So that shows across. We've got a slight misalignment here. So we probably want then the vertical alignment to be center. Same on here. See if those two center out, which I'd hope they would. If they don't, it's the alignment of this 0 font, and that hyphen probably just needs to go. There we go, that's in. So now we want it much fainter and thinner. So we will want the height definitely to be 1, and the opacity probably 0.2. And there we go, we're getting closer to that now. And all we should have to do is paste these in a few times to get that looking just right. So considering this is just a static grid for now, we'll dump it in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not sure how many we need. Paste a few in. Row 1, 2, and obviously we can move this out to a style, a custom control. But again, remember, don't bother doing this until we're happy with the entire thing. If we get so far down this and realize the grid just isn't suitable, we're doing nothing but wasting time by making all these things cleaned up and in their own kind of control. So just dump them in to start with, and as always we refactor afterwards when we're happy that everything is staying where it is. This will now be -3 and nothing else has to change. And we've got -6, -9, -18, -54. And then we don't need anything on the bottom row, so I don't know whether if we remove that, it will scale correctly, or whether we simply need something in there to take up the gap. Yeah, so -54 then hits the bottom, so we do need something. So we will put something in there, and we'll just simply make this opacity 0, maybe. And that could say -60, just for, you know, if it ever accidentally got viewed. So we've got that, it's just that the -60 isn't quite right here. So do we need to adjust this? So you've got the first row just being auto. So I think in this case, is it just that we need that the other way around? There we go. So that way around is working correctly because you have it spaced off the bottom. So that's now correct. And there's the outline. You can see again, it's even fainter. I'd say it's actually probably thicker but fainter. So now because we've done this on each one, we're just going to have to painfully go through and correct each one. And again, this would be perfect if we'd have done a style or anything else. But there's only 10, so not like it's the end of the world. And let's have a look at that. And then we can always obviously perfect where the axis falls, because at the moment we have a graph underneath and lines above. And there you go, that's pretty close. And I think, well, I'm fairly confident we're going to be able to get this to work for sure. Let's just correct this outline here as well. You see that it's actually staggered. So that is because we have technically a grid with no row column definitions. So let's just move the column definitions out, do an auto, and then a star to take up the remaining ones. And let's move these out and just put all the labels in one and all the rectangles in one. So let's just do that again. I know we've just done it all, but it's not that hard to redo. Otherwise, you're going to have different scaled labels. So this one wants to be grid dot column. Well, column 0 is by default, so you don't need to specify it. But you do need to specify grid dot row as 0. And now we should be able to do grid dot row is 1, 2, 18, so that's it up to 9. We also want the horizontal alignment to be right, so that all the text pushes to the right based on hopefully the largest label. This will have now rows like that, columns correct, width correct. I think that's it. So does that correct that slight text alignment thing to give us a nice even space? And yes, it does. So now you've got a perfect straight line there. So I think we'll leave it at that for now. We've shown that we can definitely get this working. I think next up we need to figure out the scrolling ability, which if we look at this live charts here, I've found a way to browse. If you go to this Blazor example, it gives you a nice way to flick through. You can see if you do constant change, it supports this. So we know lines auto update is possibly something there, but notice it's not scrolling. However, if you go to the step lines one, you can see it moves. Now I know it's not what we want, step lines, and it's kind of staggery and disappearing, but this looks like possibly somewhere in the realms of what we need to do. So if we hunt in the documentation, we should be able to find a way to do this kind of scroll. It's obviously supported, and it's clearly supported here, but in this case, it's not scrolling the axis at the bottom, which again is something we want here. And I'm pretty sure we'll be able to tag the ability to have the axis scrolling. But that's now the graph in. You can see the real audio is on the left still. We can pump the real audio into this graph fairly soon. We just want to get it so that we know when it's scrolling what the format of the data is expected to be, added to the chart, so we know how to pump this data in. That'll be nice and easy, and then we'll instantly have a usable graph. And then we can look at trying to do things like this color at the top, which I'm sure we can do. And if not, yeah, I'm very confident we can do that. Worst case, you don't see the red, but I'm very confident we can get that working. This chart at the side, I'm pretty sure we can do exactly the same thing. We can either draw this manually or just make use of this chart, rotate it sideways and fill it with the appropriate information. And this down here, this sort of selectable and scrollable section, I have seen when you look at the old live charts before this, I took a browse in here, and somewhere in here, it definitely showed, was it in scrolling? Yeah, look here. So you got the bar at the bottom. Now that's almost exactly like the bar here, which is making me kind of believe maybe the Julian loudness meter is literally using live charts. I mean, you can see how close we've got it already within not much time. And it's not inconceivable to think they've potentially just overlaid this like we have. The graph on top is basically the same thing. It does look very, very similar. So either way, I'm hopefully thinking this will already be in. And if not, it's definitely something we could possibly add. So that's it for this, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.